Hello, everyone, and welcome to Recycling in America. This is the fifth part of our five-part webinar series about recycling, and we're here to talk about what's working, what's not, and what do we do about it. Today, we're focused in all on policy, so it should be good and spicy, nice and active. So as you're coming in, go ahead and use that chat feature to drop in there where you're coming in from. It's fun to see folks calling in from all over the country, and we see folks from other countries too. So say, hello, I'm from this town, and we'll welcome each other in. We've got, at last count, Anthony, you said 2,960 what? How many people registered?
2,966.
That's a good amount of registration. So we'll see how many are able to join us today. I am very glad to host this webinar today with Anthony Ticino, who leads our federal policy work, and will be joining us. So Anthony, our plan for today is really to hear first from the attendees, the almost 3,000 people who've signed up. We want to know what's on your mind. So we've got a little poll for you. And then we're going to set the stage. What's going on in policy in America right now? And to do that, we have Scott Mao from our team, who's going to give us the lay of the land. Then we're going to dig in for the bulk of today. We're going to dig in with our guest speakers and hear from them about what's working, what's not, and what do we do about it. And then throughout all that, we really want to dive deeper into your questions. So we'll be moving through, pulling through your questions as much as we can. To set the stage, Anthony, how about a little poll?
Sure thing. Folks should see the poll pop up on your Zoom now.
All right, so the questions here are, what grade would you give our nation's recycling system in terms of policy? So grade away. Number two is, do you think it's important to pass new or improved policy? And at what level of government do you think policy is most needed? So we've got some good options there. Anthony, how's it looking? Are folks getting a few minutes to click the buttons?
Yeah, folks are eager to share their thoughts.
While they're doing that, what are your thoughts, Anthony? What's your grade?
I think I agree with a lot of, we'll see the poll results in a second. So far, only 2 folks gave us an A out of 230-ish responses, which is depressing, but I think I agree. We need lots of improvement in our recycling system.
Well, I think our speakers are going to dig into that very thing today. So why don't we go ahead? I know folks might be voting, but let's call it, Anthony. Let's see what the poll says.
And here are our results, which folks should be able to see now. We can see most folks gave us a D. I think that 60% of folks gave the US recycling system a D. I'm glad to see that everyone here, nearly everyone here, 97% of folks think it's important that we pass new or improved recycling policy. So sounds like we have the right audience. And interestingly, there's a bit of a trend here to see local and state governments leading the way in policy, but not forgetting our friends in the federal government. I think we see that policy is needed at every level. So those are our results, Keith.
I love it. Thanks you. And thanks everyone jumping in. So let's talk a little bit more about how today is going to go. And we'll start by introducing our speakers. So speakers, why don't you go ahead and unmute yourselves and say hello to the audience and let them know who you are, what you're working on, and what you're going to dig into today. Megan?
Yeah, great. Can you hear me, Keith? Great. Hi, everybody. Megan Dom. I'm the Vice President of Sustainability at American Beverage, which is the trade association for the refreshment beverage industry. So you will know our largest members like Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Keurig Dr. Pepper, Red Bull, Niagara, and many, many more. I oversee environmental policy for the refreshment beverage industry. So I'm pretty deeply steeped on a day-to-day basis in the policies we're going to talk about today. Those like EPR, DRS, minimum content, labeling, and many more. I very honored to have been closely involved in the processes to pass EPR in Colorado, Minnesota, Maryland, and Washington. And looking at many other states to come online. This is like a really fun time. This could not be more timely. And just, the reason I'm here and so excited is, the consumer brands have made these really robust goals around recyclability and recycled content. But we all know, like deep into these, that we need good policy with teeth that will achieve strong environmental outcomes if we're going to even come anywhere close to meeting them. And I just think that TRP hosting this is such the appropriate forum, being the real experts in this field. So thank you to Keith and the team. And pumped. Let's get into the scratchy issues. That's where it's fun.
So Megan will be here today with her AB hat on, but some days she joins us with her TRP board hat on as a longstanding member of the partnerships board, where she drives for more and bold policy. So thank you, Megan. Kate, how about you? Say hello.
Hello, everyone. Kate Bailey. I am the Chief Policy Officer for the Association of Plastic Recyclers, and echo Megan's thoughts of what a fun time, and so encouraged of this last series of webinars to see such a diverse audience from all over the country, because it is about moving every state forward. Some bigger steps and smaller steps, every step counts. And so just really excited to dig in on how we can meet your state where you are and move forward. Let me tell you a little bit first about the Association of Plastic Recyclers. Our members are the plastics recyclers. So what does that mean? It means when you throw your plastic water bottle, your milk jug, your yogurt container into a curbside recycling bin, it gets sorted out at your local MRF. It then gets sold to APR members. So APR members do the washing, flaking, grinding, pelletizing, making it into that new recycled plastic. So kind of the nuts and bolts of how it happens one step down from the MRF level. And we take that operational day-to-day experience of recycling 5 billion pounds of plastic every year and look at how do we scale this system? What works, what doesn't work, and where do we need policy to help this move better? APR focuses on 3 core policy areas. First is we have to design plastics to be more recyclable, more compatible with recycling. It all starts with design. Then we have to collect more materials. We can encourage collection through EPR as well as deposit programs and other policies. And then we need to make sure that recycled content is used to make new plastic, replacing the need for virgin plastic. So design, supply, demand is kind of how we look at the policy landscape. I work a lot across the states, a little bit federally and a little bit in the Global Plastics Treaty. And what an exciting time, and ready to keep moving forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Kate. The way we sum up a lot of what your folks are doing is part of the take old stuff and turn it into new stuff piece. And so I love your summary. All right, Kirk, why don't you say hello? And I want to let you know you've got some fans in the chat there, Kirk. Shout outs for your work on MPCA. So Kirk, why don't you say hello?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Kirk Adelka. I'm an assistant commissioner with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, work on land issues. So we're your friendly local regulator. And I have a portfolio that includes waste prevention, recycling, and our solid waste permitting piece, including chemicals and products and that. But the other part of my day spends a lot of time on remediation and cleanup. It's the legacy. If we don't do the things we're talking about today, what can happen and those impacts. And so this portfolio of work really is that prevention. How do we stop this from happening again? How do we learn from our past? And so it's a really fun part of the conversation, because once it's in the ground and we have a release, it's many times too late. Those impacts are being felt by individuals, families, and communities, and really want to prevent that for future generations. So happy to be a part of the conversation.
Thank you, Kirk. All right, joining us today also are 5 members of the Recycling Partnership staff. We've got Dan, Scott, Alex, Anthony, and Dylan, who are going to be active. I saw some wave there. Hi, Dan. Hi, Dylan, Alex. You heard from Anthony and Scott, who will be active in both the chat and the Q&A. Now, a word about the chat, folks. We welcome a robust dialogue. We want everyone across the supply chain here, and we want to push and pull, agree and disagree. We want to find places, but we have two rules. One, the chat must always be respectful. So we need to keep it polite. And the second one is it also has to be factual. So if at any point the moderator in this forum feels like someone is being disrespectful or purposely inaccurate, we reserve the right to say thank you very much and exit you out of the forum. So our folks will be there helping to keep the chat lively. Ask your deep questions because Anthony's going to be pulling out common themes to make sure that your speakers get those answers for you today. I'm also very excited to point out that Scott's going to be doing the deep dive on the policy today. So real quick, we believe that 5 parts must be true for a healthy recycling system. You have to design it. People have to have access to it. Humans need to be engaged. Process has to separate it all apart. And within markets, you got to make sure that the old stuff turns into the new stuff. So everything we do thinks about the whole system. And our mission is to drive a much better US recycling system. And in order to do that, the recycling system needs all of us, from business to NGO, policymakers, communities. Everybody has a role here. And that's what we really dig into. So Scott Mao, I'd love it if you joined us in setting the stage for policy and the role that policy plays in setting the future, shaping the future. And a shout out to Scott. Scott Mao works on the partnership team, but back in the day, he used to be my boss. I worked for Scott at the state of North Carolina and learned a lot about what system thinking for recycling really looks like. And Scott, what year was it? 2004?
Don't even want to think about
it. A long time ago, but that's the first time I ever heard about EPR and the role of policy. And you've been a tireless champion from your leadership at the state level and here with the partnership. So I wanted to give you a shout out for your leadership and ask you to please set the stage for the audience and what's going on in policy.
Well, thank you very much for that, Keith. I'm really excited to be here with everybody. And my job is really to get through this content and set the stage as quickly as possible so we can listen to our awesome panelists who are going to really talk to us about the exciting time that we're in right now in the passage of policy. This slide that people are looking at right now, I think of as our room for improvement slide. You know, we've got 2 things on the bookends here, those pinkish kind of items that are on design and markets. Those things are hard to quantify, but I don't think anybody on this call would disagree that we need and can make progress on both elements. Access to recycling, not bad. We're getting a C there, right? But why wouldn't we anticipate and feel the need to have 100% a perfect grade there? We do need that to happen. The F on participation is driven in part because of that lack of access, but also because folks are just not as engaged as we want them to in the services that are offered to them. So there's a lot of room for us to do around recycling behavior and all of this pulling on the rows together there. And then, you know, Mercer doing a pretty good job, B+, but why couldn't they be A+? These are the things that we really think about from a system perspective as, again, room for improvement. And this is why we think and are excited about a new wave of policy coming forward. So let's go to the next slide. So why did I say new wave? Okay, it's kind of hard to remember this, but the first wave, this massive climb in this curve you see here, was driven by policy, largely in the form of states passing policies that set up grant and technical assistance programs, set planning and goals, assign roles and responsibilities. A lot of times, market development programs, recycled content inside the same time frame were, you know, the foundational deposit recovery programs, the bottle bills, if you will. And we got that big climb. Really, really amazing to see that happen. And then we flattened out. We kind of stagnated. We saw a system that kind of had hit its limits. And in large part, that was because the roles and responsibilities devolved to local governments and the decision-making and their financial power to move the system forward. And that's why we're kind of stuck today. And that's why we are looking forward to a new wave of policy. Next slide. Okay, so what does that look like? To take the middle part first, you know, DRS has been around for a long time, And that map is kind of stagnant and haven't many new DRS programs, but we're seeing a lot of activity around DRS. And I think, Megan and Kate will probably talk about that a little bit. And we're seeing activity within those green states to improve their programs, right? In Connecticut, California have made major improvements to their programs. So even though those are legacy policies, you might say, there's a lot of activity there. EPR is taking off on the left, just picking up states left and right. It's super exciting to see. And then people are really connecting the dots on the right side to think that minimum recycled content needs to be revisited and needs to be strengthened. And that's also gaining momentum.
Hey, Scott, real quick, what's EPR and what's DRS?
Oh, thank you for asking. The DRS first, deposit recovery systems or bottle bills. So EPR, extended producer responsibility.
Good, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so the new wave of policy, what's driving it? We see a lot of the bullets here, right? Landfill issues, the issues, around markets and the turmoil we've seen there, public sentiment. All these things are really major factors in getting us to move forward with a new wave of policy. But really, I think it's all about performance. It's that slide we just looked at a minute ago. We're stuck and we need something new. We had massive progress through the 90s and early 2000s, got to a point where we just weren't moving forward. And that really is the impetus now. How can we really get the system to perform at double the rate that we're currently experiencing? Next slide. So my plan, Keith, was just to go through every cell of this table. Is that okay?
Could you do it as slowly as possible? Perhaps read every word, Scott.
Yeah, that was my plan. California. Okay.
Well done.
Okay, so this is a bewildering slide to look at, clearly. And the gist of it is that these states are all passing laws based on their individual circumstances, the kind of problems that they think that need to be solved, and applying their circumstances to the development of legislation. What that's leading to is some disharmonization. Not all of these laws are built the same way or trying to accomplish the same things. So that's going to be an element going forward. And we've seen this before in the United States with the development of the electronics producer responsibility laws, back in the last couple of decades. So we're on a path to some disharmonization here, but there is also room for optimism here. So we can go to the next slide. Excuse me, Keith. We do see now elements of harmonization starting to appear, right? Education and outreach, an agreement that education and outreach is really critical to getting us to the next stage, getting folks to use the services that are available to them, resourcing education and outreach in a really robust way. We see that as a common theme. Producer definitions, an arcane piece of this, it's really important to get that complicated piece of who is a producer figured out. And we're starting to see real harmonization on that as well. And kudos to my colleague Dylan for driving a lot of that activity. And then needs assessments. This is sort of a unique thing to US EPR compared to other parts of the world, Europe, Canada, etc. We're in each case now setting baselines in these laws about where we are, what kind of problems we're trying to solve, and how we get there. So needs assessments are now being harmonized in many of the laws going forward. Next slide. And to continue that harmonization, I think then we can look at principles. What are we trying to achieve? What are the main goals of these programs? What are the common elements that should be part of every state law? Performance targets right at the top. We are doing this because the system is not performing well. So let's set a target that's achievable, but also ambitious. That's a key part of designing these laws. We also want to just make sure that markets are strong going forward. And then we are on to the next slide, and we are seeing that there's now growing support, right, for this from key elements. Environmental elements, producers, we've come a long way on producers supporting this. There's opposition. People shouldn't get too worried about that. There's always opposition. We're building this policy, this new wave of policy on an existing 30-year system. Folks are going to be worried about what's happening to their business, etc. But there are ways to accommodate these opposition parties, and to move forward and make the law work. And then the last slide, I think. So how do we advance what we're doing here? I think really it boils down to being nimble, active, informed, and having a mindset of collaboration. And that's what we see as the key. That's why we see laws passing in states where those things are happening. That's where the law gets passed. And we'll never have a perfect law. We're going to keep working on it. But the activity is amazing. Momentum is super exciting. And I'm really looking forward to the panel talking about what's happening in the future.
Thank you, Scott Mal.
You're
On staff, sometimes you're referred to as Professor Mal. Do you know that?
That's embarrassing. I'm going
Yeah.
off camera.
It's not at all. So setting the stage, in each of these, we try to put together a bunch of slides that help set the stage, and you're going to get all these at the end because it's a lot of what you'll reflect on later. So we try to front load you with that. You've got to vote for president there, Scott Mao, in case you didn't know that. So, all right, Megan, Kirk, and Kate, it's time to dig in. Let's hear a little bit more. In these series, we talk about what's working, what's not, and then what do we do about it? Because the partnership's all about action. So Kate, why don't you set the stage? What's different about policy today? Because Scott really laid that out, but tell us what's happening today and what's getting you going? What gets you excited?
It is such a fast moving time. So I've worked in recycling for 20 years. I often tell people Congress, for example, has talked more about recycling in the past 2 years than they've talked about in those 20 years combined. So 10 years ago, a lot of these same problems, a lot of these same conversations about EPR, bottle deposits, but today we are on a much bigger audience. We are part of a national conversation. There is a global plastics treaty negotiation underway. Like, the landscape has changed, and there is not a place across the world that is not talking about recycling in some form or fashion. So it has accelerated across the globe, which is great, because those of us who've been working on it for a long time have been like, hey, we've got some good ideas. We can do this together. And I think the most exciting thing for me is the players have changed. So I used to work at a MRF, shout out to EcoCycle in Boulder, Colorado, and people used to call us and they used to say, don't you talk to the producers about this packaging and why is it not recyclable and those things? And back then we weren't having a lot of conversations as everybody in this supply chain. And really what's changed is the players at the table. So the producers, groups like ABA, groups like Environmental Leadership Forum, the Business Coalition for a Global Plastics Treaty, Coalition for High Performing Recyclers, like industries coming forward and saying we need recycling to work better. And we partner that with the local government support and the environmental support. And you walk into a legislature and you say, I've got business support, environmental support, and local government support, and that's your winning combination. So it's an exciting time because we are coming together as that entire supply chain.
Yeah, when the recycling partnership started, policy was a P word, or we called it the P word. Like it was not supported. And now in this EPR, just for framework, the whole principle of EPR is if you're a company selling into a marketplace, the law says you have a responsibility to pay into a fund to make sure that recycling really happens. It's not just on the back of local government. It's not just a hope that all the pieces come together. It's really building the robust system. And so, Kate, that shift of having the companies that are going to pay for this, the private sector, the NGOs, all in one space is totally different than it was when we started. So good framing. Why don't we just jump right into what good looks like? Kirk, I wonder if you could get us started. When we talk about policy, it could mean a lot of different things, but from your perspective at the state and as a state leader, what does good look like?
Yeah, well, one is enforceable, and that is somewhat colored by us being a regulator. But I think that's also being a change as people are distrusting in institutions overall and systems. We see it in recycling. Folks want to make sure things are actually being recycled or handled in the proper way. They want verification of that. And so you have to build that in a good policy now. So what is it to make sure that what is being said will be done is being done? And that's really important to a lot of groups to sign on to the law. We have EPR language here in Minnesota from a decade ago which had some very vague statements. This one needs to be in the plan, but there really is that, what's really been built out in these bills since then is that area. The other is flexibility. We don't know everything. There does need to be it. And so that's where those things butt heads, that enforceability, the specifics that folks want, but still providing flexibility. And you see that in a lot of the conversations as you go through. So I think those are two of the very important parts, and they kind of are at loggerheads sometimes with each other, which makes good policy difficult.
Yeah, enforceable and flexible. I think we'll just describe them as this. Megan, what's good look like to you?
Yeah, no, Kirk, thank you for that. That was like such a great groundwork to lay for everybody. I would just mention that good policy for us, we about 5 years ago worked with our environmental partner, World Wildlife Fund, to create what we thought were like model EPR principles. And I'll just quickly name them and then move on. But you know, of course, environmental outcomes. The status quo isn't working. We wouldn't be here if it is. That's first and foremost, moving away from that status quo. Any system needs to be convenient for consumers, whether it's EPR, DRS, whatever, that it's something that we're not putting a burden on them. Program dollars need to be ring fenced so that they're not being spent on other government programs. Like we need to keep investing in the system. Any policy needs to support environmental justice. And lastly, prioritize circularity so that valuable materials are kept in a circular loop. You know, and we started with those 5 principles 5 years ago. And as we continue to get into it, we're getting a lot weedier quickly. It's like you think you understand it and you go off a cliff. These things are really complicated and really nuanced. And I would say, you know, things that we recognize now that the conversations we're having are, you know, these things really need to be producer driven, obviously funded by producers, but driven that way too. They're the group that will be responsible for meeting targets. So there needs to be some sort of like ability to optimize the system. But also that haulers and MRFs need to be fairly compensated, that there are legitimate business concerns from the waste and recycling community. And I think that Kate hit on it a couple of minutes ago, but just this idea that, you know, we really are listening to each other. I think in the beginning we were coming at it at odds. And the only way that this works is when we work together and hear each other's, you know, bend or break moments and incorporate those in.
So the principles that you worked on with WWF, environmental outcomes, system convenience, it can't be harder for the humans, right? The program dollars need to stay dedicated to recycling, environmental justice, and circularity, that recycling is one part of a bigger picture, and that it has to serve the public and the private sector, communities and MRFs. I think that those are good tenets. And Kate, I'd love to hear what good looks like from you too. I also want to flag that I missed one important thing. Audience, as you're engaging with this, why don't you use the chat to really chat with each other, throw things out, like what's on your mind. But if you have a question for the speakers or for staff to really dig into, go ahead and use that Q&A function, because that chat tends to fly pretty fast. So thanks for letting me jump in there. Kate, what do you think about the framework that Megan just shared? And I want to recognize you were critical, you know, before APR, you, Kate Bailey, were critical for getting Colorado passed, like you biggest champion and hard worker. Did you sleep during that time, Kate?
Probably not. And I will, you know, we work closely with Megan and the ABA team on passing Colorado. And I think we walked away from that conversation like any good negotiation where everyone is a little uncomfortable. No one got exactly what they want, but no one didn't get what they want, right? Because we listened, we took 70 plus stakeholder meetings. And when people came to the table and they said, this doesn't work, we said, okay, well, how do we work through this together? So the answer was never no, it was, how do we problem solve? And so good policy looks like coming to the table, rolling up your sleeves and saying, this is how my business operates, this is what my county needs, you know, and working towards solutions. And I think, so 3 words for me and for the EPR team: practical, achievable, and flexible. So I want to echo Kirk's role in implementation. As we've passed EPR, I hate to say, passing the law probably wasn't the hard work, right? Now we have to implement, and we're reading these PRO program plans about how are we going to invest in recycling in Oregon and Colorado, and which communities are going to get new bins first, and how do we compensate the haulers. And those were all the questions that we had on EPR when we were having a lot of the policy debate. And so now we're starting to solve some of those problems in the program plans. So, there is so much work to do in implementation. And then the whole time in Colorado, one of the things I really tried to keep in mind is we're trying to design a recycling system for the next 30 years. So let's not pretend that we know what packaging is going to be like. Like, we're not designing a MRF to accept newspaper anymore, right? Who knows what that's going to look like? So we need to acknowledge that there are a lot of unanswered questions. And is there a process within the law or within the agency that we can evaluate, we can identify problems, and we can resolve them? There has to be that evaluation, improvement, feedback loop in the programs, and that's the role of the agency, the advisory council, and the different players within EPR. So practical, achievable, and then that flexibility to evaluate and improve.
I want to note that you've also been nominated for president once, so you can run against Scott, but you've been identified as a spirit animal twice. So your choice on which one you think is really your way, Kate. I think practical, achievable, and flexible is the name of the game for us too. And what came to mind as you were saying that is perfect can't be the enemy of the good, right? Like we've got to work, we have to make sure that we're not just being idealistic about this. So Kirk, why don't you talk to us a little bit about common misconceptions? Like, so I see some things in the chat of, what does this really mean? So when we talk about policy, as you're addressing and passing it in your state, like, what did people get wrong about what policy can and cannot do?
Yeah, I think I'll build a little bit on what Kate talked about. And it really is, then when the implementation, that is the hard part. We have experience passing policy, but if you don't continuously support it moving forward, it doesn't make a difference, whether that's resources or education. And that we passed a metro commercial recycling requirement here a number of years ago in Minnesota for our Southern County metro area, required commercial and businesses to collect 3 items. No money behind it for education, outreach, or making sure folks had done it. So it's great, passed it. I think we could all give ourselves claps on the back, but has it made a difference? It's that additional piece that needs to be there. This is something that has to be continuously cared and fed, and we will build good policy, which will lead to good systems, but we also need people to use it. And that's where education and outreach really is really critical. And policy is hard to do that sometimes. Change behavior. As the Recycling Partnership has done work in this area, that is really a key as we move forward to supplement policy.
Absolutely. And I think what you're talking about is there's a function that it plays. When I think about the role that policy doesn't play, I think about design. Like when we look at EPR in Europe, EPR in Europe is years ahead of us, and we see good progress. But when I was there last May, the biggest concern that I was hearing about is it didn't properly address design for recycling. So making sure the good stuff got in the bin, and then the end market or recycled content piece, the old stuff really was going into somewhere else. So Kate, what's your take on misconceptions, or those two that I have? Those are critical adds to existing policy.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about the demand side of things. So recyclers are a business. I think we think a lot about recycling as it's an environmental good, it's a social good. I know that's why a lot of us are here, but at the end of the day, it's a business. And that recycler, whether you're in plastics or paper or metal, has to sell their recycled content against the cost of virgin products. So plastics recyclers are out there every day saying, hey, buy my recycled content. And companies are saying, maybe I'll buy this virgin. This virgin plastic is really cheap and really prolific these days. So we have to look at how do we help recycling succeed as a business, because it has to be part of the economy. And we know how to do that. There's a lot of great opportunities, but I think we get focused a lot on the collection. We'll just collect all these materials, and we have to make sure that there are buyers at the end of the day. So that just plays a really important role. And so, I think to me that comes back to that broader misconception of like, there's one thing that's going to fix it. And if we can just take this bill and put all these pieces on it, it's like, we've got some big problems, not just in recycling, but in climate and plastic pollution. And there is a need for a lot of tools in the toolbox on all of these things. So instead of fighting over, which piece is better, I mean, it's more how do we support the broader comprehensive strategies that we're all going to need.
No silver bullets. Megan, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I agree. And I would also add that I think that like the continuum of a feedback loop is really important. And the way that we've designed EPR in US, like we have this really unique element, which is the advisory board, which doesn't exist anywhere else. And it's such a smart idea because what it does is it allows for really all stakeholders to play a role. So you have government who obviously is doing oversight, passes the law. It gives up or down vote on whether the pro plan and other features are acceptable, but also you have this advisory board made up from like the other stakeholders. So you have your environmentalists, you have your waste and recyclers, you have other influential folks, other folks that are impacted, local governments who are then able to advise both the department and the producer organization with regard to kind of like the local flavor. Not every state's the same. Every law will require different things to accommodate the unique features of each state. And so I just think that that is something I want to recognize and give everybody who thought of that a lot of credit because it really does allow for this kind of like circular feedback loop, which is going to be great.
So I think, we're kind of bridging from what works to what isn't, because that's what policy is trying to do, is pull us out into the what isn't working back into the what is, but we're going to still have, the list won't be done, I think is what you folks are saying today. So let's talk about challenges. Challenges to passing, challenges to implementing, because passing takes a whole lot of work. We have all worked years and years to pass it. But what that means is as soon as it passes, then you've got a whole lot of other work to implement it. And it's the work of using the committees that you all just talked about to refine them, to make sure that they are really working in practice and not just in principle, or planning for the future. Because as Kate said, we can't get ourselves into telling ourselves we know what's coming. So Kirk, could you start us off on some of the challenges to passing and implementing?
Yeah, I think it takes, as many have mentioned, a broad coalition. I think one of the things that a lot of times come up at legislatures or local governments as they're passing things is cost. And we really look at it a very high level piece, that first layer of what is maybe a specific cost to a business or a consumer. And we forget that a policy will have costs to implement it, but we don't talk about what are the costs if we don't do anything. And so in terms of recycling and that, someone's paying for this, whether it's very easy to think of as my recycling bill or my disposal bill, but then also what are those costs down the line? As I mentioned earlier, I work on the cleanup sides, and we have costs that many times are not quantifiable because we've had that release or the loss of the use of natural resources or human health impacts. And so how do we bring into that conversation too? And I think it's one thing to also remember, what we talk a lot about in Minnesota is the lost opportunity. If we can't extend the life of something or recycle it or compost it, we throw away 1 million tons of recyclables each year in a landfill. And we pay for the privilege to do that, because we've got a hauler bill. And those materials, those 1 million tons are worth $143 million. That's 15,000 plus jobs in Minnesota that could be created. And I think we take a very narrow view of costs when we come to policy on that, and not these other areas too, which really helps even out as we look at new policy, is that it isn't that huge cost difference that folks like to make it be or perceived to be, because they really aren't looking at what are those other costs that many people aren't front of mind for them. So cost is a big one, and really understanding the full cost of things.
Full cost. What else, Megan, what else is on your mind of challenges?
Yeah, I think, the challenges we've seen are when, different EPR has, and I've said this before, but EPR has this kind of almost like round table of stakeholders that are often odd bedfellows that maybe don't trust each other. You have producers, you have the waste and recycling industry, you have local governments, you have the environmental community, you have larger government. not necessarily all used to working together. And so I think one of the challenges in the beginning was some stakeholder groups, including us, at sometimes being too rigid and just like holding a line and saying we're not going to bend. And that didn't work. And I would, the process that Kate mentioned earlier about this like 70 stakeholder meetings. And then we saw Mallory Anderson, who I see is on, who we all owe an incredible debt of gratitude in Minnesota for not hours, like months and months and months of stakeholder listening that she did and was able to find and weave these kind of differences together to find alignment, to keep folks together and pushing it forward. And we've seen that now mirrored in Washington with Rep. Berry and McKenna Morgan, and then also in Maryland with Senator Augustine. So I just think that that process has been so helpful. And sorry, I didn't really answer your question because you're asking about a challenge, but I'm hoping that I'm weaving through that how we solved that challenge, which was you can't be so rigid. And Kate said it well, like we know we're successful and everybody's kind of a little unhappy.
Yeah, yeah, when you feel a little uncomfortable. Anything else from you? Or I'm sorry, Megan, I was looking,
Oh.
you could tell I looked over at Kate. So anything else from you, Kate, here?
Yeah, it's always helpful to ground in the fact that most policies fail every year. You can have a great idea, the best idea, and have the most support, and the legislators are tied up talking about the budget or healthcare or transportation or a lot of really important issues. Politics is hard, policy is skill, it's also a little bit of luck. So it's going to take some time and it's not going to solve it all. So we really need to know, there is a role for voluntary as well that helps lay the framework for things. So just, coming from that perspective, not going to always get it right the first time. But I really want to focus on specifically in the plastics space, like representing plastics recyclers. There's a lot of controversy around plastics. I don't want to shy away from that. And as APR, we recognize recycling is part of the solution, but we need a comprehensive set of strategies to reduce plastic pollution. There's a role for reuse, there's a role for reduction, refill, and there's a role for chemical recycling. Both can be true, and we spend a lot of time arguing on the periphery of like, what's the role of these things, rather than focusing on what we can do right now. So case in point, 7 out of every 10 water and soda bottles are littered or landfilled in this country today. We can recycle 100% of those bottles tomorrow. Let's focus on that. That is a collection, a participation problem we can solve. Yes, there are other big sticky issues. We should talk about them. I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about it. I'm just saying there's a time and place to have some of those discussions, and not every conversation has to just be in, which camp are you on this or that? It's like, where do we have common ground? Where can we start moving forward? And where can we set up the framework to get to some of those harder questions, those harder materials, things that are not even packaging? All of that can come in time. We don't need to do it all right now.
Good. So I think moving towards success is, Megan said, people who assume are odd bedfellows, understanding that they're not. They're all critical players in this and moving forward. So let's talk about some successes. So for what the state that might be next, or for folks who are really working to drive EPR in their state, what's a success story for how you help sell a strong story of policy? Like what's the pitch? Megan, I see you nodding. How do you drive this forward?
Yeah, I wanted to give one just kind of nerdy example of success that I hope resonates, is that years ago, American Beverage, we want a full funding model. That means 100% funded, and Ameripen, who represents other consumer brand companies, wanted a partial model. And we were just butting up against each other. We could not find alignment there. And it was Mallory and her team in Minnesota that came up with this. How about at least 90%? And it sounds so stupid, but like just those words, we were all like, okay, I can live with that. Because for us, we're like, at least 90% could get to 100 one day, right? You're not prohibiting 100. And for them, it was, okay, this is at least a nod to partial. And so just those type of like really weedy compromise situations are really helpful. I think the idea of rowing together is just, and I will think of another one while there's talk, but that was just an example I wanted to share.
Kirk, how about you from the government side? You know, for other government leaders that might be there, what resonates?
Yeah, I think you need strong leaders in this area and legislative champions or champions on your city and council or county boards. And that happens before the legislation gets to them sometimes. I think in Minnesota, we were successful in part, not only from folks like Mallory and the counties that really spearheaded the formation of this. We had really two legislative champions that when all of us couldn't be in the room, they could with their colleagues and have those conversations, knew it very well, and could make the case for it and also talk about it. And I think that's really helpful to have those champions built before you get to the policy, if possible.
Anything else, Kate?
I want to give a shout out to something that's also happening across the country right now, which is EPR for batteries, which if you talk to recyclers is one of the scariest things. That's what keeps you up at night. So there's really been a great coalition coming together to support EPR for batteries from the safety perspective. This is a great example of how recycling starts to become part of the conversation at the legislature and how you can bring together different groups and start to get comfortable with having some of these conversations. And there is just so much groundwork that happens before we even get to a big conversation, like a bottle bill or EPR for packaging. And so just think that conversation around EPR for batteries is a great kind of foundational exercise and something that I think a lot of states could give a good look at for next year.
I think, you know, Anthony just sent me a text that's kind of coming through on some threads of, we've talked about this being a lot of work, a lot of hours. Do you ever feel burned out, like from lack of progress, or do you feel, how do you practice perseverance? And I'll just offer, from the partnerships point of view, we talk about this quite a bit of, it's hard to work in the environmental space. Right now, it's really hard to work in the environmental space. And to do it, at the partnership, we talk about having courage, optimism, and badassery. And that's what we do. But what about y'all? Kirk, I saw you smile. What's perseverance for you?
I mean, I think it's understanding that things aren't always in a straight line. It's start and stops. There are setbacks. And I'll say from a regulator, sometimes a year with something not passing helps us catch up and implement on things too. And I think that's where sometimes it's the bright shiny is always the policy. And that, you know, is the definition of win. But as others here on the panel have mentioned, it's implementation. It's really bettering that system. Our laws all have a vision of what EPR is going to be. But those plans are going to, you know, be different in small to big ways from what we're expecting. And we can make progress there still too. Or it's the grant programs that are being done by NGOs or for-profit companies or public entities. You know, I think those are successes, each one of those projects too, because it may seem small on a community of, you know, 5,000 of that, but that's a huge change for that community, and it really is building upon all of it. So I think the bright shiny isn't the only way for success. There's multiple ways for success.
I like that it's not a straight line. And Anna, I see in the chat, courage, optimism, and badassery. Alex is on our team and he jumped in there. Kate, what do you, you know, if you ever feel tired, and actually I feel like it's a lot of work, but freaking excited. I've been in this field since like 1998. I'm from the 1900s. Does anyone else know that Nate Bargatze joke? But like, so freaking long, and it has never been this interesting. It's also causing real-time aging, but I'm all for it. So like, Kate, what keeps you going?
That's what I remember is all the years when no one would talk about it. And now that everyone's talking about it, we're all overwhelmed. There's so much good stuff to do. It's like, okay, this is way better than no one talking about it. But to me, I like to spend a lot of time in the desert. I like the Grand Canyon area, and I just go there and I think about time on the scale of millions of years. And policy, it doesn't take that long, but you know, it's such an emotional roller coaster. You have a bad committee meeting, you feel like you missed the legislature, this deadline. I mean, it is just up and down all day, every day with politics, and it's at the end of the day, it's a long game. It's where are we going to be in 10 years? What is the new system we're building? How is it going to be better? And just all of you, I mean, great people that we work with trying to make this all happen.
I see some real champions on the chat, like Gloria Hardigree, and I see Heidi Sanborn, Catherine Oakes, like people who have committed their lives to this. So 3 cheers to us all. And Megan, what about you?
Yeah, I would just say we're all still learning, and that makes it really exciting and fun and cool. And it's changing every day, right? I mean, these policies keep evolving, and that's what's fun. And then we realize, like, oh, wait a minute, you know, the circularity that we're all, you know, in all we've all want the same thing here, right? But in order to achieve that, what about responsible end markets? And like, you know, new things keep coming in and coming up in ways that are helpful and good to drive the policies the way that they need to be driven. And I think that that keeps you energized. And I think, to be fair, I mean, we got Washington and Maryland like in the past few weeks, so we all get a nice shot in the arm, and we are all rested and energized. So you know, it pays off. It pays off. So.
All right, I'm going to have one question and then we're going to go to your call to action. Okay, so the question from the audience is really about a starting point for folks who live in places where EPR might not be politically viable now. Like, what are the on-ramps? What does that look like?
So I would love to start that because I would have 5 years ago would have put good money on the table that Colorado was not going to be on this EPR map anytime soon. And I know a lot of people in the audience would have put good money on that with me as well. But in hindsight, I see that EcoCycle and other groups, Recycle Colorado, we're building a good foundation of the conversation. Started with a state of recycling in Colorado report to even show, wow, this state is terrible at recycling. We don't have access, we're losing revenue. What is the problem? And that was a drumbeat. We started showing up at the legislature and just having a lobby day on recycling and started to talk to people. And as Kirk mentioned, you know, you find a legislative champion. We had Senator Lisa Cutter, Senator Kevin Priola started coming to Recycle Colorado conferences and just learning about recycling and talking about it. And then, you know, passed some bills on economic development and different things. And looking back, I'm like, oh, we were building a roadmap to EPR. Of course, that's not what we thought we were building at the time. We were just trying to get some traction going. So, you know, there is no shortage of things you can do to start to get that conversation going, and happy to help folks talk about what's doable in your state.
Love it. Megan and Kirk, any other on-ramp call to action pieces?
I think that
trust on-ramp, not call to action, on-ramps, yeah.
I think trust is really important, and it's grown a lot, and I think that's really meaningful and important, and I think that that continuum is paramount. I think that, you know, sometimes I think the exemptions conversation is getting a little stale and old, like, and I feel like that's disingenuous.
Meaning what shouldn't be covered by the policy?
There, like for the paper industry, for example, paper keeps, you know, fighting about like, oh, we shouldn't be, and it's like, you should be in, like, can we move on from that already? So I think that kind of like trust and earnestness among like this group is been really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Kirk, what about you?
I'll just echo, you know, building blocks beforehand to move forward. And I would just elaborate a little bit more on something Kate said, is none of us who passed EPR for packaging and paper, it was not our first EPR bill. Just the concept, and I'm reminded of this as we're moving into EPR in a whole nother industry, they have no idea what it is. So just think of a legislator who brings this on. So maybe it's paint EPR, or it is loose individual batteries, which may be a gateway to your state or your community's first EPR bill, which you have a lot of industry supporters become familiar with it, say, hey, that's good concepts. You know, the producer manufacturer has a role in the disposal and the proper handling of it. You start introducing some of those concepts, and that can be a building block to things. And then it is paper and packaging one day, or a much larger, you know, electronics, everything you can plug in empowered EPR type bill, those type of things in the future.
Good. All right. Well, I think we need to start going into the home stretch here with a call to action to help us with this. Dylan, can you come off screen? So Dylan DeThomas on our team has been the state level EPR champion, earning how many millions of miles in the past few years? And so Dylan, I was wondering if you could kick us off with a call to action on for either choose one, a community, a policymaker, or a company. What's your call to action when it comes to policy for recycling?
You know, I think we could speak to all of those. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm excited to be here with everybody. I want to speak to the companies that are listening, that are chiming in, is we need more proactive, positive voices to be able to positively and powerfully implement these laws. I put this to all companies across, the service providers, the packaging producers, the brands that we're talking about, is we need their expertise and interests and the specifics in mind, but not just no. The answer has to actually be yes, and we actually need their input and their feedback, as opposed to just pushing back through trade associations to stop legislation, instead improving the legislation, making sure that we're able to reach the goals that all of us need to be able to transform the U.S. recycling system. Thanks.
Thanks, Dylan. You also got to vote for president, just so you know. Alex or Kirk, what's your call to action here?
Can I just say ditto to Dylan? I think he had a great point there. I just want to emphasize that. I think the other piece is have those conversations before legislation, make those relationships with your legislator, your county commissioner, your city council member. We have walked into many meetings, and I had a legislator who would always come up and say, I just talked to my solid waste administrator, and here's the things they needed. And that is more powerful than some of the others of us who are going to step in the room. And those in the industries, you make those relationships and connections.
I love it. All right, Megan and then Kate, your call to action.
So mine first would be everybody should get out of their own echo chambers, talk to other folks, understand their concerns and what they see as opportunities. I also would make sure I was a member of the recycling partnership if you're not already. And I mean that as somebody who is a member, and the value that we get from not just all the data and all this information, but that TRP is really a trusted third-party stakeholder in negotiations and conversations around policy. And I think we all need that. So
I love that. Thank you. Kate?
Two things. One, we all have a pathway forward. So happy to talk to anyone who thinks my state will never get there. It's a when, not an if. So let's find that pathway, no matter how long it takes, how many curves, we can get there. Second is specifically to local governments. There is nothing more valuable than a tour. Take people to your facilities, show them that it works. We're running a recycling in action program this month. We really need to rebuild trust, not just in plastics recycling, but recycling writ large. It is happening every single day in your communities, and legislators need to see it happen. And then you can talk to them about how to make it better. So nothing like a good tour.
I love that. And my call to action is everyone on this webinar, we want your feedback of what kind of webinars you want next and what you need from the Recycling Partnership. So you saw there was a link in there for a survey. You'll get that by email afterwards. But my call to action is to pull out your phone, scan this QR code, and this will take you to our page where we have all the recordings of these webinars, but distinct actions that companies, communities, and policymakers can take, because as our esteemed speakers, Megan, Kirk, and Kate laid out today, this isn't something we can do alone. It's not going to be an easy job, but by driving policy, we can boost it up and then get to work on the other pieces. And at the Recycling Partnership, since day one, we were ready to take challenges head on and have hard conversations and really be fierce about solutions, fiercely committed to action. And so I thank everyone who's joined us today and in the past days for this 5-part series of recycling in America. What works, what doesn't, and what are we going to do about it? Kate, Megan, Kirk, thank you very much. Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everyone.